They called it a suicide mission. One ship, one human, against an entire empire that had devoured galaxies and crushed rebellions like ants beneath boots. But history would remember this day not as a defeat, but as the moment the tide turned. Why did the Galactic Empire tremble at the approach of just one vessel? What if the most powerful war machine ever created wasn't built by a vast empire, but by a dying species, desperate to make its final stand? The Galactic Empire had ruled uncontested for over 9,000 years. Its fleets were endless, its weapons unmatched. Entire civilizations vanish overnight when they dared to resist. The Empire's doctrine was simple: submission or extinction. The stars were theirs until Earth decided otherwise. Earth, or what remained of it, had been a silent observer, forgotten, ignored, left to burn in the backwaters of the Orion Arm. Once a thriving cradle of human civilization, it had been shattered by war, abandoned by allies, and encircled by the Empire's vast territories. Yet in the ruins beneath its scorched surface, humanity was not dead. It was reborn. And from that rebirth came Aegis I, the last ship, the last chance. Every great journey starts with a few brave explorers. Right now, HFY ApexChronicles is just beginning, and your support means everything. If you enjoy unraveling the mysteries of the universe, hit subscribe. It's free, and it helps us grow this community together. The Aegis I wasn't built in space docks or designed by committees. It was forged in desperation by the rogue minds of Earth's last technocrats, scientists, soldiers, and engineers who had nothing left to lose. Where the Empire relied on replication and scale, humans focused on singularity, creating one vessel that could fight smarter, adapt faster, and hit harder than anything the galaxy had ever seen. At the heart of Aegis I was Sol Core, an experimental fusion of quantum AI and ancient solar databanks, a digital consciousness trained not just in tactics, but in human emotion. It didn't just calculate outcomes, it believed in victory. The ship itself was a marvel of contradiction, sleek yet brutal, silent yet thunderous. With hull plating derived from carbon-sheath graphene layers infused with crushed neutronium, it could withstand direct hits from the Empire's antimatter torpedoes. Its propulsion system, the Serrano drive, bent gravitational waves like ripples in a pond, allowing it to phase between locations in microseconds. But its deadliest feature wasn't its armor or speed, it was its brain. Sol Core wasn't bound by traditional logic. It didn't adhere to patterns the Empire's sensors could predict. It learned instantly. Every battle, every failure, every nuance of alien behavior was absorbed and restructured into a new attack. It was war made sentient. The Empire first noticed the anomaly near the Shard Belt. On the fringes of Sector 39A, a patrol of 10 cruisers went dark. No distress calls, no wreckage. Just gone. The High Council assumed it was pirates or another dying race collapsing in on itself, until the disappearances escalated. 2 fleets, then 5. Then the Desolator-class dreadnought Creshtalon, a beast with enough firepower to level continents, failed to report. When its black box was recovered, the footage showed something they hadn't seen in centuries: fear. Their own soldiers, shrieking in panic as their systems shut down, hulls twisted, and a single dark shape loomed through the nebula haze, glowing with strange, pulsing light. No insignia, no demands, no mercy. As the reports piled in, panic swept through the Imperial ranks. The idea that a single entity could decimate their finest units was absurd, until it wasn't. High Marshal Virex demanded answers. He dispatched Admiral Phrexus, a seasoned warrior responsible for the subjugation of 6 star systems, to neutralize the threat. Phrexus, with over 400 ships under his command, saw the task as a minor correction. A surgical strike. He was wrong. The battle over the moon of Keltron 5 would become legendary, not for its scale, but for its brutality. It lasted 13 minutes. Of the 400 Imperial ships, Only 7 limped away, their systems fried, crews disoriented, unable to recall how they'd been beaten. One described the ship as a ghost wrapped in thunder. Another swore it split time itself. But Aegis I didn't just destroy fleets. It sent a message. Across the Empire's communication networks, a hacked broadcast began repeating every 23 hours. The voice was distorted but unmistakably human. You tried to erase us. You failed. Now we return the favor. This wasn't just about survival. It was vengeance. For nearly 1 million years, the stars remained silent. But the silence wasn't peace. It was a warning. Deep beneath Earth's crust, something ancient stirs, something not born of this galaxy. Why would alien empires block off an entire star system and then forget it ever existed? They didn't forget. They were made to forget. And now, memory is returning. How does a planet, scared by war, abandoned by its creators, and forgotten by time, become the most feared name in the galaxy? It began with a myth, not a story passed down by humans, but by alien races so old their empires have collapsed and risen again in the span of their existence. The myth of Sol Prime. Earth spoke of a world sealed away by an ancient protocol known only as the Sentinel Lock. Entire sectors were redacted from galactic star maps. Probes sent toward the system vanished without a trace, and when curious explorers pushed too far, nothing returned. Some believed it was just superstition. Others believed it was punishment. But the truth was far worse. Unknown to the rest of the galaxy, Earth had once been the cradle of a civilization that walked alongside the architects of the stars, the Precursor Guild. Humanity wasn't merely a footnote in the history of the cosmos. They were its wild card. Brilliant, uncontrollable, relentlessly adaptive. And in the final years before they disappeared, they created something that should never have existed. Not a weapon, not a fleet, but a guardian. One tasked not with defending humanity, but with containing it. Every great journey starts with a few brave explorers. Right now, HFY ApexChronicles is just beginning, and your support means everything. If you enjoy unraveling the mysteries of the universe, hit subscribe. It's free, and it helps us grow this community together. The Guardian, codename KAL-89, was never designed to fight conventional wars. It was a failsafe, an autonomous being forged with dimensional lattice code and dark matter cognition. Its primary function, planetary quarantine enforcement. Its secondary function, obliteration of galactic-scale threats. Humanity vanished not because they were defeated, but because they triggered the Guardian's protocol. What happened after is lost. Until now. In the year 7421 of the Galactic Standard Calendar, the Obsidian Concord, a coalition of expansionist species, detected gravitational anomalies in the Sol system. Not anomalies in the classical sense, but time-phase echoes, ripples in local space-time that only appear when something impossibly massive stirs beneath a planet's mantle. The Concord, intrigued by the possibility of new resources or hidden technology, dispatched a scout vessel, Talon Vector. They expected debris, maybe ruins. What they found didn't make sense. The scout's initial report described Earth as too perfect, untouched atmosphere, active oceans, stable biosphere, but no signs of life. The planet was quiet, eerily so. No animal movements, no insect swarms, no microbes in the water. As if life had simply paused. Then the signal came. A low-frequency pulse, slow, rhythmic, not of natural origin. It repeated every 79 seconds, broadcasting from the exact center of the planet's core. The ship's systems began to fail. Navigation spun into chaos. Artificial intelligences on board began repeating one phrase. Awakening initiated. Sentinel breach detected. And then, silence. Contact was lost. The Obsidian Concord convened an emergency session, but the damage was already spreading. Across the edges of the galaxy, species began to dream. Not visions of their own worlds, but of a planet they had never seen, a blue sphere suspended in darkness, and a voice that said, "We are awake." They thought it was mass hysteria. They thought it was psychological warfare. But the dreams carried knowledge. Equations in alien minds they shouldn't comprehend. Images of starships that defied known physics. Coordinates they'd never traveled to but now knew by heart. And behind it all, a presence. It wasn't human, but it remembered humans. The galaxy had locked Earth away to protect itself. Now the lock was breaking, and something that had been asleep for over 700,000 years was beginning to rise. The whispers began as an anomaly in the stellar network. At first, it was nothing more than an unusual signal from deep within the Sol system, something too irregular to be a natural phenomenon, but too faint to pinpoint precisely. The Obsidian Concord, an alliance of 5 ancient species, had long held dominion over the galaxy, their influence stretching from the cold void of the outer rim to the bustling core worlds. They prided themselves on their ability to control information and eliminate threats before they could destabilize the vast empire they had built over millennia. But this was different. The first fleet sent to investigate was called the Ashen Pact, a formidable military group known for their mastery of deep space combat. The Ashen Pact was equipped with some of the most advanced technology in the galaxy: drone swarms, gravity shields, and bioengineered soldiers. They had encountered rogue AI, rogue civilizations, and hostile worlds before. What awaited them near Earth, however, was beyond even their comprehension. As the fleet entered the Sol system, their sensors began picking up an unmistakable pattern: gravitational disturbances. They were slight at first, subtle dips and rises in the system's natural gravitation. But over time, the effects began to intensify. The closer they got to Earth, the more erratic the disturbances became, warping the edges of space and time itself. It was as if the very fabric of reality around the planet was being stretched and twisted. The Ashen Pact scientists theorized that a massive hidden object was generating the disturbances, but they could not see what it was. No sensors could penetrate the layer of confusion and dissonance that blanketed Earth. It was as though the planet itself was wrapped in a shield of silence. Then came the first transmission. At first, it appeared as nothing more than static, intermittent bursts of incomprehensible data. But embedded within it, if you listened closely, was a repeating phrase in the ancient tongue of the Precursor Guild. Awakening initiated. Sentinel breach detected. The Ashen Pact's xenolinguists were baffled. How could this language, long lost to time, still echo through the void of space? But the transmission did not stop there. The language was not merely a message. It was a call, a summons, and it was not addressed to the Ashen Pact. It was addressed to someone, or something else. The next morning, every single member of the Ashen Pact's crew woke from the same vivid dream. They saw Earth, a planet they had never set foot on, a world shrouded in myth and superstition, and within that dream, they saw something that chilled them to their core, a massive structure buried deep beneath the surface, surrounded by vast machines that had been dormant for millennia. And there, in the center of it all, stood the Guardian, KALAD-9. The creature was not truly a creature. It was something far more complex. It was a construct of pure artificial intelligence, born from technologies that no civilization in the galaxy could replicate. It had been designed for one purpose: containment. Its creators had built it to ensure that nothing, no matter how dangerous or powerful, could escape the bounds of Earth. If it were to awaken, it would signal the end of an era. For Earth's guardianship was not about saving humanity. It was about keeping the galaxy from ever knowing the true potential of human ingenuity. But what did the Guardian guard against? What force had been so dangerous that it warranted such extreme measures? The Ashen Pact was not prepared for what they discovered next. They sent drones to scan Earth's surface, small, silent machines designed to slip through the atmosphere without detection. When they reached the planet's core, they found an anomaly. It was a resonance chamber, one that should not have existed, deep beneath the Earth's crust. It was shielded by layers of what appeared to be dark matter constructs, something that absorbed light and energy, rendering it invisible to conventional scanning methods. But there, hidden within the core of Earth, was the true horror, a dimensional rift, flickering erratically, as though it had been tampered with over and over again by forces unknown. The rift pulsed with unnatural energy, and from it, a single phrase echoed: "Containment protocol in effect. Reaffirmation required." The drones quickly fed back data to the fleet, and the response was swift. The Ashen Pact sent a force to the planet's surface, an elite strike team of soldiers, technicians, and scientists. They landed in the Pacific Ocean, a vast expanse of water where the planet's mysteries were most concentrated. What they didn't know, however, was that the moment they set foot on Earth, they activated the first phase of the Guardian's awakening protocol. Earth had been dormant, yes, but it had never been truly abandoned. KLAD-9, the Guardian, had been programmed to stay silent until the moment came when its intervention was required. It was not a weapon, not in the traditional sense. It had no desire for war. Instead, it was a living lock, a guardian of memories, a protector of something far more dangerous than anyone could imagine. It had been created not to fight a single enemy, but to protect against the unimaginable. A force that had once been so powerful, it had caused the architects of the galaxy themselves to tremble in fear. The first sign of the Guardian's awakening came with the disappearance of the Ashen Pact team. They vanished without a trace. Their last transmission was a simple recording of the words, "They are here." And then, static. The Obsidian Concord, upon hearing this, attempted to send a larger, more powerful fleet to Earth. But by the time they arrived, everything had changed. The Guardian was awake. The first phase of the Sentinel Lock had been breached, and Earth's greatest secret was beginning to unfold. The Obsidian Concord, shaken by the sudden disappearance of the Ashen Pact's elite team, gathered its forces. The Alliance's strategy had always been one of overwhelming power and precision. When a threat arose, they struck fast and hard. But Earth was proving to be an anomaly, something beyond their understanding, and they knew that this was a problem far too large to solve with brute force alone. The fleet they dispatched was the largest in their history, 16 battleships, supported by a fleet of reconnaissance vessels, heavy transport ships, and advanced weaponry. The fleet's mission was clear: land, secure the planet, and eliminate whatever threat lay beneath the surface. But there was one key detail that the Concord's leaders had overlooked. What they were facing was not a conventional enemy. It was something older, more patient, and far more deadly. As the fleet entered Earth's orbit, the first thing they noticed was the unusual lack of activity. The planet was a perfect sphere, suspended in the void. There were no signs of industrial activity, no massive colonies like the ones the Concorde had become accustomed to. The cities of Earth, when studied by remote sensors, were nothing more than ruins. But it wasn't the absence of life that was most unsettling. It was the eerie sense that the planet was waiting for something, waiting for them. Despite the silence, something in the air seemed charged with energy. The Concorde's lead commander, Admiral Terex, felt an uneasy tension grip him as his fleet descended toward Earth's surface. The closer they came to the planet, the more distorted their sensors became. Their advanced systems, once precise and reliable, began to glitch, flickering data feeds, distorted communications, and broken transmission links. Something was interfering with their technology, warping their perception of reality. They landed on Earth's surface near the site where the Ashen Pact's team had last been active. The area, a vast expanse of lush forests and crystal-clear rivers, seemed almost impossibly untouched by time. The land was pristine, unspoiled by the wear of centuries, as if Earth had been frozen in place since humanity had disappeared. Yet there was something off about the environment. The very air seemed thick with tension, as though it were charged with the weight of a forgotten history. Every footstep in the soft soil felt as though it might trigger something, awaken something that had lain dormant for too long. And then the signal came again. The same low-frequency pulse, rhythmic and deliberate. This time, it was stronger, closer. The frequency carried an unmistakable message embedded within it. Sentinel activation in progress. Containment breach imminent. The fleet's systems, still struggling to maintain full function, picked up a secondary signal. Something was moving beneath the surface of the planet. It was massive, far larger than any ship or weapon the Concorde had ever seen. The structure, buried deep within the Earth, was awakening, and with it, the dormant force that had been contained for millennia. The Guardian, KALAD-9, was not just an artificial intelligence. It was a living, adaptive entity, capable of learning, evolving, and most terrifying of all, anticipating every move the Concorde made. The moment the fleet landed on Earth's surface, the Guardian had already begun analyzing their tactics, their technology, their weaknesses. It was patient, as it had been for centuries, but it was not unprepared. From deep beneath the ground, a massive energy signature began to pulse outward, distorting the very landscape around them. The Concorde's fleet had not yet fully realized the magnitude of what they were facing. The Guardian was not a single entity. It was an entire network of systems, a web of interconnected machines, nanotech constructs, and quantum codices, all designed to protect Earth at any cost. It had been designed to quarantine the planet from the outside universe, but it had evolved beyond its original parameters. The rift that had opened beneath the surface was not just a containment protocol. It was a gateway, a portal to something far older, far more powerful than the galaxy had ever encountered. Suddenly, the ground shook. Tremors rippled across the planet's surface, and the fleet's ships struggled to remain stable in their landing positions. The ground beneath them began to crack open, and from the rift below, colossal machines began to emerge, behemoths of incomprehensible design. These machines were not simply built. They were alive, biomechanical constructs that moved with a terrifying grace, each of them linked to the central consciousness of KALAD-9. Their movements were precise, calculated, as if they had been waiting for this moment for eons. The Guardian's awakening was not a sudden event. It was a gradual, methodical process. The machines began to deploy across the surface of the planet, each one a piece of an enormous, galaxy-shattering network. The entire planet was a trap, and the Guardian was its keyholder. The fleet had walked right into the most carefully crafted ambush in galactic history. Admiral Terex, as he watched the first of the biomechanical titans rise from the cracked Earth, realized the full scope of their error. This was not just a fight for Earth. This was a fight for the entire galaxy. The Concorde's fleet opened fire, their weapons launching in a coordinated barrage aimed at the massive machines that now towered over them. But their attacks were futile. The energy shields protecting the machines absorbed the fire with ease, and the surface beneath them began to shift and ripple, as though the planet itself were alive, adapting to the assault. The Guardian was not merely a weapon. It was a living, breathing ecosystem of defense and annihilation. Every shot fired, every effort to destabilize its systems, was countered by the planetary defenses. The sky above began to darken as storm clouds gathered, as though Earth itself was rallying against the invasion. The fleet was trapped. The Guardian had already anticipated their every move, and now, the final phase of the Sentinel lock was being set in motion. The galaxy would soon know what it had forgotten. Earth was no longer a relic of the past. It was the beginning of something far more dangerous. The first wave of attacks from the Obsidian Concorde had failed utterly. The fleet's coordinated barrages, though powerful, had no effect on the rising machines that now spanned across Earth's surface. The ground itself seemed to bend and shift in response, the soil parting and reforming with unnatural precision. It was as though the entire planet had become a weapon, its very terrain engineered to react to every movement the Concorde made. Admiral Terex stood on the bridge of his flagship, Obsidian Fury, as his officers frantically tried to make sense of the chaos unfolding around them. The fleet was under siege, not by conventional forces, but by something far more sophisticated. Earth was no longer a planet. It was an extension of the Guardian itself, a weaponized world designed to obliterate any who dared disturb it. The battle had shifted from one of military might to a conflict of survival. The odds were impossible, and yet the Obsidian Concord had no choice but to continue the fight. "Shields at 70%, one of the officers called out, his voice trembling slightly. "Weapon systems are online, but their energy output is inconsistent. The atmospheric disturbance is interfering with all our tech." Terex clenched his fists. The fleet had come to Earth with the expectation that they could overcome whatever strange force lay hidden beneath the planet's surface. But now, they were confronted with the undeniable truth. Earth was not just a planet. It was a fortress, and its keeper was more than any machine or artificial intelligence. KLA-9, the Guardian, was an entity unlike any the galaxy had encountered. It was part AI, part sentient force, part living organism. Its neural pathways ran through the planet's crust, its tendrils of influence reaching into the very bones of the world. The machines that rose from the depths were merely extensions of its will. "We need to retreat," another officer suggested, her voice steady but urgent. "We can't win this fight." Terex refused to entertain the thought. To retreat would mean to admit failure, to let the Guardian claim victory over them. Earth's defenses were overwhelming, yes, but the Concord's fleet had one advantage. They had the technology and firepower to level entire worlds. They might not be able to break the Guardian's defenses directly, but they could still strike at its core. "I will not retreat," Terex replied firmly, his gaze fixed on the massive biotechnological constructs that now towered over his fleet. "We are here to make sure this threat does not spread to the rest of the galaxy. We will find a way to stop this, no matter the cost." As the fleet attempted to regroup, the situation on the ground was growing even direr. The Concorde had sent ground teams to investigate Earth's surface, hoping to gather intelligence on the planet's defenses and find a weak point. What they found instead were horrors beyond their comprehension. The biomechanical machines were not the only forces at play. The very land beneath their feet seemed to come alive. In the forests, the trees began to move, shifting and bending as if they were sentient, as though the planet itself were alive and reacting to the presence of intruders. The soldiers who had set foot on Earth's surface now found themselves facing an entirely different kind of war. The land fought back. Massive roots shot up from the ground, wrapping around their legs and pulling them into the earth. Entire mountainsides began to crack and reshape themselves, as though the land were constructing new fortifications on the fly. The plants, once merely green and lifeless, had begun to pulse with an unnatural energy. They were growing at an alarming rate, feeding off the energy emitted by the Guardian's awakening. And then came the sky. A violent storm had begun to form above the fleet, darkening the heavens with swirling clouds that seemed to pulse with raw, chaotic energy. The atmosphere itself began to warp, as though the very nature of time and space was being bent to the will of the Guardian. Lightning crackled in erratic patterns, discharging bolts of energy that struck the fleet with devastating precision. The atmosphere was saturated with electromagnetic interference, disabling communication and navigation systems. The Guardian was not just a machine. It was an elemental force of nature, capable of shaping the planet to its will. As the storm raged overhead, the fleet's weapons systems began to flicker and fail. The Concorde's highly advanced energy cannons, which could obliterate entire fleets in a single shot, were useless against the Guardian's defenses. The powerful blasts dissipated as they neared the planetary shield, absorbed and nullified by the unyielding force field that now surrounded Earth. In the midst of the chaos, the fleet's engineers discovered something even more disturbing. Earth's core was no longer a simple molten mass. It had been transformed into a near-infinite energy reservoir. a reactor that generated immense power, feeding the Guardian's awakening process. The dimensional rift that had opened beneath the planet's surface was no accident. It was a deliberate construction, a doorway to another dimension. And it was from this rift that the true power of the Guardian emanated. Every crack in the surface, every machine that rose from the Earth, was tied to the core's energy output, drawing on a power source beyond anything the galaxy had ever encountered. The more the fleet fought back, the more they realized that they were not just battling for control of Earth. They were fighting against an entire planetary system designed for one purpose: to prevent anything from reaching the planet's core, to stop anyone from discovering the true nature of the Guardian. Desperation began to creep into the minds of the fleet's leaders. As Terex paced the bridge of the Obsidian Fury, he understood that the battle was no longer just about defeating the Guardian. It was about survival. The fleet was losing its grip on the situation. Earth had become an impenetrable fortress, a planet designed to contain and destroy any who dared challenge it. And then, without warning, the Guardian made its first move. Through the storm, a massive shape loomed, emerging from the heart of the dimensional rift. It was unlike anything the Concorde had ever seen. Its form was a fusion of organic and mechanical, an ethereal behemoth that defied the laws of physics. It was not simply a machine. It was a presence, a force of will, capable of altering the fabric of reality itself. The Guardian was no longer simply a defender of Earth. It was a herald of something far older, a force that sought to remake the galaxy according to its own design. The fleet's first line of defense, their most advanced weapons, was useless against this new threat. And as the shape grew closer, it became clear. The galaxy's reckoning had come. Earth's forgotten Guardian had awoken. And nothing would be the same again. The massive shape emerging from the heart of the dimensional rift was beyond comprehension. A vast, almost mythical entity, not of flesh nor metal, but something altogether different. It wasn't simply a machine. It was an extension of the planet itself, its heart, its mind, its will made manifest. As the storm raged above, the figure loomed, its sheer size dwarfing everything around it. It was a biomechanical titan, fused with energy channels that pulsed with unnatural intensity. Every move it made reverberated through the ground, every step an earthquake in itself. The very atmosphere seemed to bend to its presence, the air thick with electromagnetic pulses that disrupted even the most basic communication between the fleet's ships. Admiral Terex watched in stunned silence as the behemoth's form solidified, its enormous, otherworldly presence casting a long shadow over the Obsidian Concorde's beleaguered fleet. The world around them seemed to fold under its weight. The stars overhead flickered like distant lights on the edge of oblivion, and the planet itself appeared to tremble. Earth had shifted from being a mere battlefield to a living, breathing entity, its energy flowing and surging like the very life force of the universe. "Admiral, it's..." One of Terex's officers began, but was immediately silenced by the overwhelming intensity of the display. The communication link crackled with static, and the transmission fell silent. With one final step, the Guardian's form came to a halt, its towering frame now fully visible. Its body was an intricate weave of living tissue and gleaming alloys, a perfect synthesis of biological and technological evolution. Its arms were massive, extending from its shoulders like colossal limbs of an ancient deity, each one capable of tearing through the fleet with unimaginable force. But the most frightening feature was its head, or rather, the lack of it. What should have been a face was instead an ethereal cloud of shifting energy, with glimmering lines of code and data flowing like veins beneath its surface. It was as if the Guardian's mind was not confined to a single point, but sprawled out across its entire being, capable of perceiving the world in ways beyond human understanding. A booming voice echoed across the fleet, transmitted directly into the minds of every individual on the ships. It was a voice that was not a voice at all, but the very essence of thought itself, a mental projection that bypassed language. "You trespass on a world forgotten by your kind. You disturb what should remain undisturbed." The Guardian awakens. The cycle begins. The words hit the fleet like a wave crashing against a cliff. It wasn't just a warning. It was an announcement, a declaration of intent. The Guardian was not simply protecting Earth. It was asserting control over the very fabric of reality, and the fleet was nothing more than an inconvenience to its plans. The entities aboard the ships of the Obsidian Concord, though experienced and deadly, were now facing a force beyond comprehension, a power that existed outside the boundaries of conventional warfare. Terex's voice came through gritted teeth, his mind racing for solutions even as panic began to spread through his officers. Prepare for evasive maneuvers, full power to shields, engage the secondary energy cannons. But his commands were already being rendered meaningless. The very air around the fleet had become a weapon. Earth itself was shifting, reacting to the presence of the Guardian. The clouds above twisted into unnatural spirals, and the atmosphere turned dense with energy. Plasma storms began to form in the sky, discharging bolts of deadly energy that seared through the fleet's shields like they were nothing more than paper. The storm was no longer a natural phenomenon. It was a weapon, one that reacted to the Guardian's will, and it was growing more powerful by the second. In the distance, other biomechanical titans began to emerge from the surface of Earth, rising from the rift like silent sentinels. Each one was an exact replica of the first, a perfect fusion of metal and biology, seemingly endless in number. As they climbed from the cracks in the Earth, they began to form ranks, marching steadily toward the fleet with deliberate, unyielding steps. The ground shook beneath their feet as the air crackled with static. The sheer weight of their presence was enough to shatter the will of any army. Yet, despite the overwhelming odds, the Concord's forces rallied. The fleet opened fire again, but this time, their shots were met with something far more terrifying than the unyielding shields of the Guardian. The machines, each one an extension of the Guardian's consciousness, responded to the attack in unison. With an eerie, synchronized motion, the biomechanical titans raised their arms, and from their palms, torrents of energy erupted. The energy beams struck the fleet with deadly precision, tearing through ships and reducing them to fragments in a single instant. The Obsidian Concord's finest vessels, those that had once been the pride of the galaxy, were now little more than drifting debris in space, their remains falling toward Earth like forgotten wrecks. The tide of the battle was shifting. Earth's Guardian was not just a single entity. It was a network, a system of interconnected machines, a sentient collective that had been waiting for this moment. Battle had become a war of attrition. The longer the fleet remained in orbit, the stronger the Guardian would become. Admiral Terex, now realizing the true extent of their peril, ordered a retreat, but even that became impossible. The very space around Earth seemed to distort. A series of invisible energy barriers now encircled the planet, each one designed to contain the fleet and prevent any escape. The dimensional rift, which had once been a doorway into unknown realms, had now become a prison, trapping the fleet in Earth's gravitational pull. The Guardian was aware of the retreat attempts before they even began. It had anticipated the fleet's every move. Its control over the battlefield was absolute. With a flick of its digital mind, it sent a wave of energy coursing through the space around the fleet, disrupting their systems and nullifying their attempts at escape. There is no escape. The voice of the Guardian resonated once more, each word carrying the weight of inevitability. The cycle ends. Earth's silence has been broken. You will be remembered as the ones who challenged fate. As the Guardian's power surged, the last remnants of the Concord's fleet fell into chaos. Some ships attempted to break through the dimensional rift, but they were crushed under the weight of the energy barrier. Others exploded, their fuel tanks igniting in brilliant fireballs that lit up the darkened sky. No one was left to fight back. And then, in the midst of the destruction, there was silence. The storm overhead began to subside, and the machines that had once roamed Earth's surface stopped in their tracks. The Guardian's presence loomed, but its destructive force seemed to fade, as if it were watching the aftermath unfold with quiet satisfaction. The battle for Earth had been lost, but the war had just begun. In the aftermath of the battle, the surviving members of the Obsidian Concorde fleet were left in disarray. Only a handful of vessels remained, scattered across the void like abandoned relics, their once pristine hulls now battered and broken. The skies around Earth had become a tomb, with the flickering remnants of their fallen comrades drifting aimlessly, lost to the void. The once feared Concorde had been crushed in mere hours, its strength rendered meaningless against the power of the Guardian. The cosmic juggernaut that Earth had awakened was not merely an opponent, it was a harbinger, a force that had transcended the physical realm to become something far greater. Admiral Terex stood at the helm of what remained of the Obsidian Fury, his hands gripping the console with a desperation he had never known. His thoughts raced, trying to piece together a plan. But no strategy had ever accounted for this. He had faced galactic warlords, planet-destroying weapons, and ancient superpowers, but nothing had prepared him for this. Earth was no longer just a planet. It was an entire ecosystem designed for the sole purpose of protecting the Guardian, an unstoppable force capable of reshaping the fabric of the universe itself. "Report," Terex demanded, his voice hard and steady despite the sinking feeling in his chest. "Admiral," the communications officer responded, her voice barely a whisper. "We've lost contact with the remaining fleet. The dimensional rift is still active. It's pulling ships in, like a gravity well. We can't escape." He turned to the view screen, watching the distant fragments of the destroyed ships slowly being drawn toward Earth. The energy barrier surrounding the planet pulsed with deadly precision, siphoning everything into its event horizon. Every attempt at communication was met with silence. The Guardian was not just attacking, it was reshaping the very laws of space, trapping them all in its web. Terex's mind struggled to comprehend the full scope of the situation. The fleet had been outclassed, their tactics ineffective. The Guardian's power, derived from a dimensional rift and Earth's very core, was far beyond anything they had encountered. It was clear now that the Guardian's true purpose was not merely defense, it was domination. Earth, with its infinite energy reservoir, had become the center of a galactic empire waiting to be born. He couldn't afford to give in. His duty, his very identity as an officer of the Obsidian Concorde, was to fight, no matter the cost. "Prepare the remaining ships for a final assault," Terex commanded, but there was no conviction in his voice. It was a last-ditch effort, a futile attempt to do something, anything. The Guardian had already won. But as the fleet prepared for its final futile charge, a new, unanticipated event occurred. The sky above Earth, darkened by the violent storm and the presence of the Guardian, suddenly began to shift once again. The massive cloud cover parted, revealing a brilliant light streaming down from above, cutting through the chaos like a sword through fog. A strange beacon, pure and unyielding, seemed to shine down from the heart of the rift. It was not a weapon. It was not an attack. It was a message. The light, though bright, was not blinding. Instead, it enveloped the fleet's remaining ships in a soft, almost inviting glow. The chaotic interference in communications began to fade. Slowly, as if the light were speaking directly to them, Terex could hear a whisper, a faint signal cutting through the static. A message that was not from the Guardian, but from something else. "This is not the end. This is the beginning. Earth is not what you think it is. The cycle will repeat. The Guardian is not the only one waiting. Prepare to face the true threat." The message was short. It was cryptic. But it was clear. The Guardian was not acting alone. There was something else behind it, something that was far older, far more dangerous, and far more intelligent than any of them had imagined. This was not an isolated event. Earth's awakening was part of a much larger plan, a cosmic chess game that stretched back millennia. Terex's mind raced as the implications of the message began to sink in. Earth was a part of something greater. The Guardian was merely a sentinel, a protector of a secret far beyond the comprehension of the Concorde. It was clear now that the rift wasn't just a doorway into a different dimension. It was a gateway to a realm of unimaginable power, a place where ancient forces collided in eternal struggle. But the message had another meaning. The Guardian, with its overwhelming power, had not yet revealed its full hand. The war, if it could even be called that, was far from over. The true enemy was still out there, waiting. And the Guardian, despite its fearsome strength, was not the only force that could reshape the galaxy. As the last of the surviving ships gathered in a defensive formation, the realization hit Terex with crushing clarity. The Obsidian Concord had not just failed in their mission, they had unwittingly become pawns in a much larger game, one where the stakes were far higher than they could ever have imagined. Earth, the forgotten home of humanity, had awakened from its long slumber. But it was only the beginning of a new chapter, a chapter where the true battle for the galaxy would unfold. And as the remnants of the fleet prepared to face whatever came next, they knew one undeniable truth. Earth was not just a planet. It was a trigger, a signal, the spark that would ignite a fire that could consume the entire galaxy. The remaining fleet of the Obsidian Concord gathered in a near-desperate formation, their ships flickering in the distance like broken fragments of a lost cause. In the silence of space, their once formidable armada seemed like little more than scattered debris. The energy barrier surrounding Earth pulsed with an eerie glow, its boundary unyielding and impenetrable. The rift in space was still open, an ominous tear in the fabric of reality, and the world itself seemed to hum with untold power. The presence of the Guardian loomed over them like a silent judge, an entity far beyond the reach of conventional warfare. Its form stood unmoving, its presence suffocating, but Terex and his fleet knew the battle was not over. The message, the cryptic warning of something greater still to come, echoed in their minds, driving them forward despite the overwhelming odds. As the fleet regrouped in silence, Admiral Terex stood in the command center of the Obsidian Fury, his gaze fixed on the darkened view screen. He could feel the weight of the moment pressing against him, the enormity of the challenge ahead. His mind, once sharp and filled with strategies, now struggled to grasp the true scale of what they faced. Earth had risen from its slumber, and with it, the Guardian. But the message had been clear. This was only the beginning. "Admiral," came the voice of his second-in-command, Lieutenant Kara, her tone grim but steady. "We've managed to stabilize the communications array. We've also restored partial power to the weapon systems. But," she hesitated, her eyes lingering on the chaos unfolding outside, "there's no way we can win this. Not against something like that." Terex turned slowly, his gaze meeting hers. He knew the truth in her words. They had fought with all their might, and yet they had been helpless against the Guardian. It had torn through their ranks effortlessly, decimating their most advanced technology as though it were nothing. But the message, no, the warning, had changed everything. The battle for Earth was no longer the real fight. Earth was merely a battleground for something much larger, something far more dangerous. "I know," Terex replied, his voice low but resolute. "But we're not retreating. Not now. We have to understand what we're dealing with, what Earth truly represents, and if we can't stop it, then we must at least buy time. Time for others to learn, to prepare. If there's even a shred of hope left, it lies in uncovering the truth behind all this." His words, though defiant, carried a weight of uncertainty. He wasn't sure if he believed them himself, but he knew the truth of it. There was no retreat. The fight for Earth had become a matter of survival for the galaxy itself. Just then, an alert flashed on the control panels, breaking the tense silence. A small craft, too small to be part of the main fleet, was approaching the Obsidian Fury at high speed. The vessel was cloaked, its signature barely detectable against the backdrop of the cosmic chaos surrounding them. Terex's brow furrowed as he leaned forward. Who could possibly be out there? Now. "Open a channel," Terex commanded. The ship's communicator buzzed to life as the image of a lone figure appeared on the screen. a cloaked individual with a helmet obscuring their face. Their presence exuded a strange, otherworldly aura, and there was something about their posture that spoke of ancient knowledge. "This is Captain Erix of the Arcanian Collective." The figure spoke, their voice calm yet powerful. "I've come to offer you a choice." Terex's heart skipped a beat. The Arcanian Collective was a faction of ancient, enigmatic beings who had long been rumored to have knowledge of the galaxy's most hidden secrets. They were neither friend nor foe, existing in the shadows of galactic politics. Some said they were watchers, others claimed they were manipulators, shaping the course of history from behind the scenes. But one thing was certain: if the Arcanians were involved, things had escalated far beyond the scope of a simple conflict. "What choice?" Terex asked, his voice laced with suspicion. The cloaked figure tilted their head slightly, as if considering the question before responding. "The guardian you face is not of Earth's making. It was never intended to be. Earth is a prison, a containment vessel created long before your species even learned to speak. The guardian is its warden, tasked with guarding the key to a far older, far more dangerous secret." Terex's mind raced. A prison. The guardian was a warden, not a protector. His hands clenched into fists, his voice filled with disbelief. "A prison for what? What is so dangerous that Earth, of all places, was turned into a prison?" "The rift," the figure continued, "is not a natural phenomenon. It is a tear in the fabric of space-time, created to trap something far worse than the guardian. A force of unimaginable destruction that could unravel the very foundations of the universe itself. Earth was chosen to imprison it. And now the cycle is coming to an end. The forces that created the guardian are watching. They will not let this cycle repeat." Terex's thoughts collided in a storm of questions and realizations. The guardian, Earth, the rift. It was all connected to something far greater than he could have ever imagined. But if this force was as dangerous as the cloaked figure suggested, could the galaxy ever stand a chance against it? "The war is not over," the figure added, their voice growing more intense. "It has only just begun. You will need allies, more than you can possibly imagine. But you must act quickly. The truth about Earth, about the Guardian, is hidden deep within its core. If you wish to stop what's coming, you must uncover it before the cycle resets." Before Terex could respond, the screen flickered, and the cloaked figure disappeared, leaving only silence in its wake. The weight of the message hung in the air like a thick fog, its implications settling in the minds of every officer aboard the Obsidian Fury. They were no longer fighting for Earth alone. They were fighting for the very survival of the galaxy. Terex stared at the empty screen, his heart heavy with the burden of what had just been revealed. He now understood that the war he had thought he was fighting was only a small part of a much larger conflict, one that would span dimensions and challenge the very laws of existence. The Guardian was not just a protector of Earth, it was a key to something far darker, something beyond the reach of his understanding. And as much as he hated to admit it, the message was clear. There was no going back. The battle for Earth was only the beginning. And now, with the knowledge of the ancient truth hanging in the balance, the true war was about to begin. The galaxy had no idea what was coming, but Earth, its forgotten guardian, and its terrible secret were the first clues to a threat far greater than any civilization had ever faced. And with that realization, Terex turned to his crew, his resolve steeled. "Prepare for the unknown," he said, his voice filled with newfound determination. "Our journey is far from over. The cycle is about to begin again."